you're going to have to be brave and you're going to have to do it with your backpack full of experiences on. None of that stuff is going to go away. If you want to create that connection, you're going to have to learn how to walk very differently and to be very differently without making those experiences go away. And it almost doesn't
Yeah.
matter what's in there. And the horse doesn't care what's in there.
There are healers on this planet with the power to soften the suffering of mankind, yet they have remained in the recesses of the world, abused, discarded, and labeled as trash. This is The Touch of a Mustang. I am your host, Shalise Clough, and I'm here to tell the story of wild horses, Mustangs, and the humans who are discovering and sharing their gifts while working to protect their well-being and preserve their spirit, so this divine power won't be lost. Join us on this quest with the wild Mustang. In this episode, I sit down with Matson and Gabe of At Ease Horsemanship to talk about the work they are developing and the incredible journeys they have had leading to the desire to use horses to help others. Matson, too, is a co-founder of At Ease Horsemanship. At Ease is a new nonprofit organization based at the foot of the Bighorn Mountains in Sheridan, Wyoming. Utilizing Wyoming wild horses, they serve U.S. military veterans, law enforcement, first responders, and all post-traumatic stress survivors via unique therapeutic modalities of natural horsemanship, wilderness therapy, and other holistic approaches. Matson is a horseman, instructor, trainer, mentor, and survivor. Gabriel the Bull is an aspiring horse trainer and nationally touring musician. Gabriel lives on horse ranches full-time, spending his winters studying natural horsemanship at Edenwood Stables in Gallatin, Tennessee, and his summers in the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming, training wild Mustangs with Matson II for At Ease Horsemanship. The background music that you can hear right now is some of Gabe's latest music. Matson and Gabriel, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited for this conversation, a chance to talk about Mustangs, which I think you guys both have a lot to share about. So let's talk about it. What has led you to the Mustang? I think a lot of times it's a pretty deep, far back story, at least for me. So
I think the trauma within my own life led me on a journey that ultimately settled with the Mustang and has allowed me to do a lot of things that really have changed changed me significantly, and that's really what we're looking and hoping to share.
yeah. And you told me before in some of the information we shared that this was trauma that started pretty young, but kind of was brought back to the forefront with some events in your life.
hmm Yeah,
Tell us more about that.
exactly. I thought I had a relatively normal life. It was definitely, there were challenges, and growing up in the 70s, late 70s and the 80s, things were very different than they are right now. I have
Yeah, they were.
four boys of my own, so I'm really, really clear as to the differences in discipline and things like that, and that are
Yeah.
acceptable. But things were different for us, to put it mildly. And I never really thought that any of that registered as things that traumatized me. And I think I came to learn in my adult life that I suppressed a lot of that. And really what caused me to become aware of that was an experience when I was 40 years old that was horrifically traumatizing. And I think it took me a lot longer to get through it and do the work because of all the other trauma that was beneath it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that happens a lot where we have kind of learned to cope with whatever, we had to, the tools we had to use at the time. And then some other stuff happens later in our life that really can bring back a lot of that.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us more about that event that kind of led to, it sounds like it was trauma, but also in a way fed into your healing and to some changes in your life?
Yeah. I share my story, with the work that we do with PTSD, with combat veterans, first responders, and people in general that are dealing with post-traumatic stress. I would say I'm pretty selective on where I share my story and how, but
Mm,
there's a saying within the trauma community that pain speaks to pain, grief speaks to
yeah.
grief. So when you've been there, you kind of have the keys to that with another person to be able to speak that language. And obviously, as the three of us know, that the wild horse speaks that language as well. We were just saying that there's no fooling and no lying to a wild horse. They know.
Yeah.
You can't go in there with a charade. My big incident happened in 2010 on Labor Day, and I had made some adjustments in my life after a difficult divorce and had finally moved kind of out of a suburban environment up into the mountains for about 3 years, and was really trying to figure out things post divorce. Had the normal custody arrangements with the kids. We had three kids from my divorce, former marriage, and then I had a younger child with my partner at the time,
Mm,
and we were living well above the town of Boulder, Colorado, up in the mountains. And long story short, back in 2010, there weren't many wildfires that raged through Colorado. They had just started to happen in the years after, but the first one hit the canyon area in which we lived. It was called the 4 Mile Fire, and we lost everything that we owned. We had literally probably 20 minutes to respond to it. There was no
yeah.
reverse 911s. There wasn't enough of a community that people were getting on the phone and wondering what was going on. It was literally like a hurricane or a tsunami where it hits. Kind of, we were in the heart of it, and it just came over one ridge. And I describe it like the ceiling just dropped.
Mm,
And it was Labor Day as well, so we were out with the kids in the yard, and it was surreal. And the thing that I always share is my recognition of it was we never thought for a second that we weren't coming back home. It just didn't register because we hadn't experienced anything like that. And the only thing that we had time to grab, we had two different trucks go off in different directions, trying to wonder if you could go down the canyon or up the canyon to get away from where the fire's origin was. And I just put the kids in the truck and ran up into the house, and the ceiling of the smoke had dropped into the house. And
wow.
instead of having time to run through the rooms and grab things that they might need, I stopped in the laundry room and just grabbed a dirty laundry basket, and that literally was all that we got from the house. Because for 2 weeks everything was shut down because there wasn't containment. And that was an interesting experience too, because you're down. I mean, this being in Colorado, you're down at the base of like a 13,000 foot range, and you can just see it being blacked out and consumed by the smoke and the fires, and you
Yeah.
literally can't get up there, and you don't know if your home survived or not. So that
Yeah.
that changed the arc of my life significantly, immediately and for some time to come, with really understanding trauma's role in my life. And I don't like to, compare that. We have these conversations all the time. A person's trauma is their own trauma, right?
Right.
Losing a loved one versus atrocities of war versus rape versus a natural disaster. There's no need to compare them because it's not relative, because everybody's life is different in how they process things. But we all suffer from this thing called post-traumatic stress.
Yeah. I agree 100% that there's no purpose really in judging the traumas against each other. but a lot of the emotions and feelings and struggles are very similar, even if they came about through different experiences in our life. And so, yeah, I agree. Something that might be really traumatic for another person could be different for someone else, but those emotions and the struggles are still very real, based on all our personal life experiences.
Yeah.
And, um, just talking about wildfires, if you have not been close to one, it's hard to explain how intense they are. And we had one come pretty close to our house last year, and you really go into, just doing what you need to get done. And, it sounds like, thank goodness you were able to get your family out of there, but
Yeah.
still, what a loss.
Yeah, and just listening to you there, I'll go on a little bit more about the experience because I think some of it's relevant. Um, Founding this organization at Ease Horsemanship a year ago, we really spent a lot of time researching the different types of symptoms of trauma, and what somebody that's been sexually assaulted versus raped versus what happens in war versus kidnapping, all these different things that make up the percentages of post-traumatic stress. I mean, there's 233 million people, 7% of our population that suffer from PTSD. And the
Yeah, and
numbers,
those are probably just the ones who have been formally diagnosed, I would
yeah,
guess. Yeah.
the numbers are crazy and they won't even sink in because they're so kind of dramatic. But, the veterans, the number of suicides, every 64 minutes, 22 a day, 8,000 a year is crazy. That's more than the whole war. That's more than the whole 11 years of Iraq and Afghanistan. The numbers.
Yeah.
So we're trying to build an organization that can make an impact amongst thousands of other organizations that have been trying to impact veterans and trauma survivors. So you try to spend a lot of time understanding what they're going through and developing programs, not just with the horse, but holistically and mindfully for trauma survivors. And for me, my story gets complicated shortly thereafter because we had to deal with not rebuilding. We couldn't rebuild. So
Yeah. Just
because
wiped everything out.
it wiped everything out and we had insurance, but the slope that our home was built on was steep enough that they basically wouldn't allow us to rebuild because they said if there's a fire in the next
Same
two to
thing's going to
three
happen
years,
again.
everything's going to go down the
Yeah.
canyon. And so what does that do to you that you want to be proud and you want to say, this is my land, nobody's taking it away from me.
Yeah.
And you're going through that guilt, but you can't do it. And that's what I refer to as the collateral damage of it. You're really not rational.
Yeah.
And I spent years and years dealing with that and not not feeling appreciative of being able to get another home and to try to settle
Yeah.
down.
And I
And
imagine that added another layer, the inability to rebuild, because I think when something happens and you can kind of get to work rebuilding something in a way that is healing, and when you don't have that ability to kind of make right what was wrong or what happened, I think that adds
yeah,
another challenging layer to the trauma cycle.
yeah, the layers, that's a really good word for it because ultimately, and we just talked about this the other night when I was kind of going through the notes, this isn't something that I work on every single day. The fire was 14 years ago. So when I get asked the question, I have to write it back down and go through the notes.
Yeah.
But what I found out again was that layer was my kids lost their home.
Yeah.
They were with their mom in Denver for long enough that they got more comfortable in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And I never got them a home that they came back to consistently.
Yeah.
And what that did to me was it challenged my perception of my parenting ability. Because that's my big Achilles heel from growing up is the father-son relationship. And if I had to really dig into it, if I finally got there after all of my work, I think that it wasn't just about the house. It was about the parenting and the loss of that. The
Yeah.
diminishing. It wasn't a complete loss, but it was affected. I'm proud that I have done my own work in many ways. And, when people ask us, all of us, why we started this organization, my answer is because we're able to, because we're fortunate enough that we're in a place of health and
Yeah.
stability and capability that we can offer the same resources that changed us to others. And
Yeah.
we do it as a service to trauma survivors, combat veterans, PTS survivors, and first responders. We're proud to be able to be in that position to do it, is the reason why At Ease exists.
Yeah. And a thought that came up as you were talking about that, we talk a lot about trauma, and a lot of times it's things that have happened to ourselves. But I also think there's an intense difficulty, which maybe it sounds like you experienced with watching, and I would imagine first responders and similar professions also experience of watching other people go through really hard things, and especially when it's something that we can't fix, we can't do something about. I think that in a way holds its own really difficult struggles. I know that's something that I've experienced as a mother, watching my children do stuff that I'm like, please, go a different way, it will be better. But, just things that you can't change and fix.
And yeah, even more so, I think that there's a level of attraction that happens between people that have lost a lot. There's just a level of awareness in how you carry yourself and how you're able to relate to other people. The percentage of people that go through major loss and trauma is very high. The percentage of people that have suffered from PTSD to the point where they've had to go to recovery, look at other options as far as therapies and medications, isn't quite as high. It's about, I think, 5% of the population. But without going into numbers, that's how Gabriel and I met, and it was long before this organization was formalized.
Yeah.
But the work that he and I did together, starting 2 years ago, it was kind of the building blocks of At Ease and working with the Mustang.
Yeah. So tell us about that. How did you guys meet and how did you come together? I think it's very exciting that you guys have a passionate group that are all working towards the same goal at Ease from what I have seen. Tell me more about how you guys came to this conclusion that this is the thing you're going to do is use Mustangs to help people change their lives for the better.
Can I commandeer that part of this
Yes,
conversation?
please do.
Okay,
Yeah,
because it's a
absolutely.
very, I'm going to fit it in as much as I would prefer to listen to you guys talk. Where, how I was introduced to all of this is fascinating. And since you're probably going to ask me about my background in this anyways, I'll start there
Yeah.
and we will quickly work our way up to how we connected because it's very interesting. Much of my life, maybe all of my life, has played out in such a way that I can take no credit for this, but a lot of it is very difficult to believe. And so while you're talking, I'm sitting here. I'm like, yeah, keep talking because I got to figure out how to make this believable.
Yeah.
So I won't go into most of it, but being that this is a podcast about horses, particularly Mustangs, we'll talk about how my relationship with horses started. Because it's not a lifelong relationship at all. This is all new to me in the context of my entire life. Even growing up in Wyoming, where you end up on some horses, but it's not the same. Do you guys ever get the sense that sort of mysterious sense that many of the events of your life are being orchestrated around you?
Oh,
Ever get
yeah.
that feeling?
All the
Yeah.
time.
I
And
never,
especially with the horses.
yeah, I never get that feeling more strongly than when I talk about this. And ironically, I never talk about this. When people ask me about my relationship with horses, I usually avoid that conversation. But Not because I don't want to have it, but because of what we're talking about. It's just hard to explain and hard to believe. But several years ago, I'm trying to make this as concise as possible, but several years ago, my entire life had fallen apart. I would say again, but probably for the first time to this extent. Everything I'd ever worked for, everything I cared about, the people that I cared about were gone, seemingly in an instant. And I found myself in my early 30s with no concept of who I was or what I wanted, and what the hell I was doing. And I had moved temporarily into my a small camper that years prior I had borrowed from my mother, and I was staying at a campground. And through events that I can barely remember, I ended up at this small horse property in Tennessee, visiting and sitting there with like 7 strangers. And someone asked me who I was and what I was doing there, and I implied in one form or another that I had no idea who I was or what I was doing there. And the young lady who owned that property looked at me and she said, I think you need to come and stay out here. Do you want to learn about horses? I said, yeah. It's it's so easy for me to get emotional about this. But I did. And I went and I parked my little camper at this stranger's house, and she had a bunch of horses. And she said, stay here as long as you want. All I need from you is to help with the horses, muck their stalls, move them around. And the main thing I want from you is I would like you to work on being able to catch that horse. And she pointed to a little horse. And I don't know anything about horses at this time. And she's, I figured out how a halter works and got the feeding schedule and started
So
shoveling.
you're brand new to horses. This is not something you grew up with, or
No. I did grow up riding occasionally, but
they were around, but not
yeah.
part of
Yeah,
your
I'm
life
just
in
a
big
regular
way.
Wyoming kid. My dad was a teacher. We're not buying horses, like
Yeah.
so so I took that to heart and I said, okay. So I went to catch that horse, and I couldn't get within 6 feet of that horse. This horse was like a ticking time bomb all the time. It was more like catching a deer than a horse. I learned days later that that horse was Mustang. And it took me took me a long time to catch that horse. It took me about 60 days to get within 6 feet of her. But one night, I remember this. I was sitting in my camper, and I saw a horse out of the pens, like in the light from the little arena. And I don't know anything about horses, but I do know that I'm kind of responsible for them. And I like jumped up and I ran to the window, and I just was so confused by what I saw. My friend Cindy, who owns the little horse property there, was outside the pens with that horse, the Mustang that I couldn't catch. And there was no halter, nothing. And she was just moving around in the yard with this horse, which to me was very confusing. I'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
And at the time, it looked like they were dancing or something. And she never touched the horse. It looked like she was asking the horse things with her body, and the horse would give her an answer. And then she'd ask something again, the horse would give her an answer, and she'd walk away and the horse would follow. And they did this for like 20 minutes, and that's crazy. I've never talked about this. I watched them in the dark for a while. And then she put the horse away, and I got to know that horse. I've ridden in some competitions on that horse. That's another story. But months later, I still have no sense of myself or what I want. And strangely, while I'm living at this little horse property, I put out some music, which was a random thing, and that began to impact my life because a few people really liked it, and I was being asked to go around and play. And somebody in my home part of the country, back in Wyoming, said, "Come back to Sheridan and play at the Mint," which sounded cool. So I went. I was up here, but I'm still pretty a mess of a human, and there was a lot of people there, like way too many people for me. It was just packed. And I went outside to smoke, and I'm standing there with a bunch of people, pretty much just wishing I was somewhere else. And there's a lot of bronze statues in Sheridan. They're everywhere, just cowboys and wildlife and such. And and this mysterious voice spoke up from behind me, and scared the bejesus out of me. That's the first memory I have. I was like, oh God, because it was literally, I thought there was like a bronze statue back there. I didn't think it was a
Yeah.
person. And and it was this guy, and it's just this tall cowboy
Oh,
character.
wow.
And your first words to me were, you said, "I liked what you said in there. That was true. What you said in there." And I was like, "What a weird thing to say. What are you talking about?" And he said that last song. I liked what you said in that last song, and I didn't know what he meant. I just said thanks, and and those are the only words spoken for a few minutes. And briefly, I think you asked me, what's your story? What are you doing here? And I didn't have much of an answer for that. I said, well, I'm divorced, bankrupt, and homeless, and I'm sleeping outside of a barn in
Oh,
Tennessee.
yeah.
And I have no answer for that. And his next words, are this long pause, and he said, I got somebody I think you should meet. And I said, okay. And I didn't know what he meant. And he gave me his phone number, and he texted me some basically GPS coordinates and told me where to be a couple days later. And so a couple days later, I'm driving out in the middle of nowhere, and I know a lot of people would probably think like, "What are you doing? Like, you don't
Yeah.
even know this guy. It's way out,
Right.
And I arrive, and it's cold, and there's this dude. He's standing off there, and he's got horses saddled, and he said, I said, "What are we doing?" He said, "We're gonna go catch some horses." And I'm trying to just act, very nonchalant about it. I said, "Oh yeah, of course we are. Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
go
that's
catch
totally normal to go
go
in the
catch
middle of
some
nowhere
horses." Yeah,
and go
and
catch some horses.
and I get on this horse. We ride out into the cold. I can barely ride. Okay, like it's this is a terrifying experience for me, but I'm very determined to not make that apparent to this strange guy I don't know. And we just start barreling out there, and we brought in an entire remuda of horses in the cold. And I'd never seen anything like that. I'd never done anything like that. To be in the center of this herd of horses at a solid run, just trying to not die, just like
Yeah.
trying to stay in the saddle, but watching just the powerful moment. And the snow is
Wow.
cold. It's a strange experience, and I still don't know what we're doing. And 30 minutes later, I found myself standing in a round pen in the middle of this arena, and he's put this Mustang in there with me. And this Mustang is not like the one in Tennessee. This is a wild horse. And and I'm kind of like, well, what do you want me to do? you know? And he said, this is who I wanted you to meet. And he said, I said, what do you want me to do? And he said, just move around with him a little bit. See if you can see if you can get him to let you touch him. And that is my best introduction to how my relationship with horses, that is still probably at the center of my life,
Yeah.
began. And it's been going for a long time. And I'm involved with At Ease because, I heard we have a mutual acquaintance that is also on a lot of podcasts. I was listening to a friend of ours talk on a podcast a couple days ago, and he said something about himself that I resonated with very deeply, maybe for the first time in my life. I don't remember what the context of the conversation was, but I think they were talking about how you deal with people maybe who don't like you, or how you move throughout the world so sure of yourself. And his response was, I like me. I would buy me a drink, he said.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought in that moment, yeah, I would buy me a drink. Like, if I saw me walk in, I would think like, yeah, I like that guy. That guy's cool. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
I would buy that guy a drink. I've never felt that in my life, and the reason I feel that way is almost entirely because of what dealing with wild horses has done for me. And so I'm sitting here talking to you because I've spent the last couple of years, especially this last year, I had a very strange year this year. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why. and trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
That little black horse that was also quite difficult to touch, I might add, that day. Um, I was this summer. I was sitting there writing about that horse, and it occurred to me. I'd never done the math. I'd never really thought about it. That I've that horse has carried me over 1,000 miles. That little horse,
Wow.
and I don't have the perfect sentence to explain to you why I know that these animals can deeply impact somebody in a way that maybe talk therapy can't,
Yeah.
but I know it's a real thing. And I know that if there's anything that can maybe get somebody to the point where they would buy themselves a drink, maybe it's horses, because that's exactly what they did for me.
Yeah.
Can I jump in for a second,
Yeah.
Shalise?
Absolutely.
So, because I love that story.
Do you? I tried to make it short.
I haven't heard.
That was great.
I haven't heard the beginning, although I know the characters in Tennessee now, because he brought them out here, and on that Mustang, he took them all up into the mountains, and it rained on us half the time.
Oh yeah.
That makes it more memorable and a lot colder.
So I know those characters. So it's cool to hear that story, but it's funny because now I've been wearing a different hat, figuratively, same hat, but since developing this company. And having to be responsible to lawyers and insurance and all this stuff. And when he said that, I was like, "Oh man, I miss those days. Let's just go.
Let's just do that.
Just get on the horse and let's go."
Forget the lawyers. Let's go.
Because and it's an epic way to do it. We can't quite do that anymore, and I know we all know that because now we run this amazing organization. But so you have context as well, and the listeners do. The Mint is a world famous cowboy bar in Sheridan, Wyoming. He was playing it. He was playing
nice.
it.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that was big time.
Okay, so he steps outside to smoke a cigarette after playing a really good tune, and that's what happened. I said,
And I think we need the name of that song also to.
I don't know. I don't know what song
either.
it was.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I guess you'll
we
have to
could
listen to them all.
We can send you some
Okay.
new
Sounds
new
good.
stuff. But so that happened, and he also has a very unique presence in social media with just really, really cool stuff so people know him. And so when you see him, you're like, oh man, shit, that's Gabriel the Bull. That's his name. And how I knew he could do what he did was I knew he wasn't inauthentic. I knew that stuff that I had seen was him. And I think there was a little more context that happened before I said, I've got somebody for you to meet. Because we talked about what was going on in his
There
life
might be,
with horses and Mustangs.
I mean, that was going to be my next question is why did you just pick up on him being like, you need to meet a Mustang?
Yeah, so I can answer that. So I do recall this sadness around, where he was at. There wasn't a lot of details. It was kind of like miss the horses in Tennessee. Of all things, there's a Mustang there. And I actually just had picked up a Mustang 2 months earlier, if that. And that's that if I think about anything for kind of like the storyline here of why we wanted to be on with you and maybe why you thought we might have some value is how the horses come into our lives. And let's not just limit it to Mustangs because horses in general have the power to do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we also have the ridiculously stupidity of forcing horses into our lives when they shouldn't be and picking the wrong ones. So the relationship with the horse is something that's really curious to observe. And so he opened this door to meet the horse's name is Three Socks, and he's a Wyoming BLM Mustang, came out of the prison system in Riverton. We can talk a little bit more about that, but I just said you need to meet this guy. And now, if he were a client, I'd have a curriculum on how he goes through it. But then it was like, yep.
Yeah, to be clear, we're not going to throw you on a horse and send you off on the.
They're not going out with a herd of horses running.
Not right away. I don't think that's
I gave him a nice steady mare, quarter horse, and we went out on a winter day and picked up about 20 horses, including the Mustang, which he had been gentled probably for 45-ish to 60 days by that point. Yeah, and that's what when I look back at my relationship with horses and Mustangs, is it's not linear. It isn't like, okay, I just did this, now I'm going to go to the next level, I'm going to do
Right.
this. It's like the Mustangs, when you are ready and you're seeking that, they come into your life,
Yeah.
especially in Wyoming, in Colorado. And I know
Yeah.
your story as well, so I think that's the common thread. And there have been now many people, both staff and, Juanita, who you met earlier, took over and started riding that horse right away. He's too small for me. He's 14.2, and probably 900 pounds. So they ride him really, really well. And yes, on the thousands of miles Gabe put on him in the last 2 years, it was very accurate. But yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, tell me a little bit more about those miles and those rides that you guys go on, because you kind of mentioned it's something you've been missing, those rides out in the wilderness.
I'll start and then throw it to Gabriel because he really put many more miles on that horse than me. I got that horse, just to say where he's coming from. He's a 15-mile horse. So that's over near Cody, Wyoming, in Bighorn Basin. And we picked him up in 2022, I think, 2023, from the Honor Farm in Riverton. And that's a prison-based Mustang program. And they do an amazing job with training horses, but some of them get 6 to 9 months, some of them get a month, and some of them don't get anything. Three Socks was definitely on the lower part of that, and so I picked him up when in the fall of 23. I said 22 earlier, but it was 2023. And I was actually, I was a range rider up in the Bighorn. So I was working a cow camp up in the Bighorn Mountains, just above Buffalo or Sheridan. And we had run through all of our horses. They were just about shot. So I wanted to go get a Mustang, and I knew the folks at the Honor Farm. I wanted to go get a Mustang that was completely ready to roll, because they typically train horses for the BLM and for Peruvian shepherds and things like that. And they do an amazing job in every spring and every fall. And for listeners that haven't discovered these guys, it's one of the tops in the country, these auctions. They just do an amazing job. They'll auction off about 20 to 40 horses and burros. And I got there and I was all ready to get myself, like a 15 hand out of the Pryors, big stout, and they were cow ready. A lot of them were
Yeah.
cow ready, good to go. They were roping
You
off
don't
of
always
them.
end up with what you're expecting.
Yeah, so
Of planning.
I mean, the Honor Farm is a working farm for the prison inmates who are basically become cowboys before they get out of there. And I couldn't believe how many people were there at the auction. And the horses were going for like 8 to 10 grand,
Yeah. I
which
believe
was
that.
a lot more than I had. And they were all, 4, 5, 6, 8. So really, really good ages. And, I had my list like I do for auctions of probably my top 10. I couldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, the prices they were going for. And Three Socks ended up being a horse that needed a lot more time. He needed the miles in the high country, but he was 14.2, and he definitely wasn't big enough for me to take in and finish up the fall work.
Yeah.
But I liked him. He looked like he would grow. He seemed to have a good disposition, and I picked him up pretty inexpensively. And like I said, I was living at a really remote cow camp. You had to walk. You had to walk like, what did you say, 30 plus minutes in
Oh yeah, maybe more.
from the road. And so when I came back from Riverton, all I had was him. And I remember I got in and it was dark. And so
Oh yeah.
I wasn't riding him. No way. So, and there were hunters because it was mid-September. They were already bow hunting, and there were hunters that were camped all over the place. And I remember dropping down kind of towards cow camp, and I had to yell out that I was walking with a wild animal because I didn't want them shining their
Yeah.
flashlights or coming out of their tents with their,
Oh God, yeah.
and it was ridiculous.
Like everyone, keep it calm.
Yeah,
We're coming
and
in.
and so I had a couple other horses that were at cow camp, and all I wanted to do was get this guy down to cow camp, which had, good paddock and everything. And from that first time, I asked so much of that horse without even being aware of what he needed and his limitations. I just put him into the scenario that I was in, and he did amazing. So months afterwards, being now I was no longer working up there, but that's just where I loved to ride because we would just go up there and cover country. And I wanted somebody to go up there and cover country with me and work this horse and just basically ride with me because I had just been ponying him and trying to teach him how to get through timber and deadfall and all that kind of stuff, of which there's so many obstacles. And half the time, the damn thing would just run away from me, and I'd just be like, whatever. And then he'd end up following me at like a quarter of a
Yeah.
mile away. So I bet you part of me was thinking, I need somebody like this guy who, from his image and his story, like I made the assumption that you definitely knew what you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because he does. He's going to sell himself
I don't
short.
know about that.
But when
Yeah.
he's on stage and singing authentic songs, he has the confidence to do it. And I think that yeah, it was the first time since working there that I went up with anybody on that horse. And you're going to remember the first time a lot better than me. So
Very clearly.
Yeah.
Very clearly.
That sounds like a story.
Well, it's mostly an internal story,
Yeah.
for me because I was spending my time as I do now, moving between Tennessee and the West. Sometimes Wyoming, but also Arizona and New Mexico and a lot of places. But I'm always going back and forth, and so I would spend my time in Tennessee riding those horses and continuing to dive into the world of them, and then I would go out on the road and do music and hopefully end up here to see and work with this Mustang. And I had one really long stint where I stayed up here for the better part of a year, which was huge for me. And that's when at some point we had went out to the aforementioned property and I'd gotten to the point where I could sit on him and I could and we could go around the arena and have that adventure because I mean he's just a green broke Mustang. It's not the same as the horses I was spending a lot of time on, and it felt very much like learning to ride anything is good, but it is a very different experience. Like especially if you're not a professional cowboy raised in the ranch world, and then I don't even remember when exactly it was, but I remember the first ride very vividly because he was like, "Hey, we're going to go ride in the high country," and I thought, "High country? What is it? What does that mean exactly?" Like we're in the high country now, are we not?
Yeah.
Um, and he just told me where to meet him, and I realized what was happening halfway driving up to the our parking spot up there in the Bighorns, and it was very much like a sort of a graduation or rite of passage from a mentor is what it was to me. You know, getting the opportunity to be, one of the only people who gets to be around this horse was already a real privilege. But then to take that, it's risky. Anything can happen at 10,000 feet. And to be trusted like that with that animal was a very big thing for me. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and the first, a horse that's that young and that green and a rider that's, I don't know what I would call myself back then. I mean, I was certainly green, but also just I have that sort of brave beginner stupidity courage
Yeah,
thing going
you
on.
don't know what to worry about.
Yeah, so you worry about everything and nothing, you know,
Hmm.
and in the first few minutes on them are interesting. It's never been written out there like that, not by somebody like me. And and we started working up our way into the high country, and we're doing things that I've never done, never thought I would do. And I remember about 15 minutes into the ride, we started moving, like really moving. Because if there's anything that could be a good representative of your personality. It's that I've never seen this man walk on a horse for more than 5 seconds. He hates
Oh
walking.
yeah.
You got to move at pace all the time, which is perfect for somebody like me because I wasn't just up there learning to ride horses. You can do that anywhere, you know.
Hmm.
I was I was there learning about myself. Yeah, I was there learning about myself, and what I learned about myself began to change the second we started moving, and the second I started to experience that kind of fear and exhilaration. Because what was so interesting about it is I could feel the same emotions from that horse. He wasn't super thrilled about me being on him either from moment to moment. It depends. You know, it's a
Yeah.
constant conversation.
Hmm.
This is not a seasoned animal who's a professional teaching you. It's
Hmm.
two animals learning how to trust each other and how to make
Yeah.
mistakes. And we've both betrayed each other more than once. We've both miscommunicated to each other and fixed that and worked
Hmm.
through those things together. And I remember we've done this many times now. And I think maybe on the third or fourth ride, I had the first moment where we come off the mountain and we like sit and drink a beer and exchange words about the ride. Because there's not a lot of talking. Again, the horses aren't walking ever. So there's not
Yeah.
a lot of time for conversation. And we get down to the bottom of the mountain. I remember the first day I was like, I felt what it was like that day for him to trust me, for me to ask him something that was uncomfortable and hard that he did not want to do. And I felt the moment he said, okay, if that's what you want, I trust you.
Yeah.
And I'll never
Hmm.
forget it. Um, and still, it's a constant, like you said, it is not linear. Every ride is different, every moment is different. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just a constant relationship. It's as if you had a human relationship where no one could lie and everyone's emotions were on the table in front of you. It would be a
Hmm.
very strange
Somebody
relationship.
Jim Carrey did a movie about
Yeah,
that.
it's like that, but with more, more reality, more drama.
We just talked about this quote that's so applicable to what Gabriel is saying. It's wilderness reminds us what it is to be human, what we
Hmm.
are connected to rather than what we are separated from.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
And that so wilderness reminds us what it is to be human.
Yeah.
How many people actually get to go into the wilderness? Not a park, not a national forest, but the wilderness.
Yeah.
And what does that represent? And so that's one of the things that we really, really differentiate ourselves at with our organization is we're striving to get people into that wilderness spot.
Yeah.
The Mustangs contain that wilderness. They represent it. And so you first start to feel it in the arena, right?
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
arenas are great. We hope in 6 to 8 weeks that we're going to get people out of the arena after about 10 to 15 hours if they're safe.
Hmm.
And they're learning with groundwork and natural
Yeah.
horsemanship, not pure cowboy stuff that we're talking about. Um, but there's probably a lot of people that come to us that do have experience like Gabe's describing.
Yeah.
But it's really easy once you start getting the horse to move with you in hand, the end of a 10-foot lead or a lunge line, or in a 50-foot round pen. It is easy to be like, all right, there's trust right here.
Hmm.
There's relationship. There's
Hmm.
communication, right?
Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just like he described with the woman, the owner of the ranch in Tennessee. All that's
Hmm.
there.
Yeah.
Relationship, trust, communication, understanding, transition.
It does translate, translates everywhere,
Yeah,
like throughout your entire life.
but
Yeah.
what about when you have to go into their world?
Yeah.
Okay, when that horse and that doggone Mustang that we got I remember, and I knew he was ready. I knew he was ready to be trusted because the very first time I put him in a trailer, within 5 or 10 miles, I got stopped at a railroad crossing, and I was the first truck.
Oh
And
boy.
he's in the back of this trailer, one of the first ones he had been in, and it's not a stock trailer, it's a 3 horse slant. And I'm like, oh, here we go.
Yeah.
And he just stood there cool as a cucumber.
Wow.
Because the Mustangs, like, we forget this. They are fight or flight, right? They have the choice to fight, but they're not going to. So they're flight,
Yeah.
right? So then not once they come to us and we've caught them, then what's their choice? Their choice is to waste away or assimilate, and they assimilate and they become these wonderful partners.
Yeah.
With
And it's
with
incredible that they do when you consider where they're coming from and what we're bringing them into. It's
Yeah.
really incredible.
It is. It's the ultimate. It's the ultimate partnership. I mean, there is no better example of predator and prey, and the lengths that they will go for us, and how quickly the really really good hands can get them there. But we're not trying to do that. We're not trying to do Mustang makeovers and all that kind of stuff. We're trying to show a relationship between trauma and trauma, and to share the story with combat soldiers, police officers, emergency room technicians and nurses and doctors, and you and I, because we've all lost somebody and we've all struggled with that, or we've all lost something. We're trying to show the relationship that Gabriel's describing. And then the second, and I'll let him go on, but the second he comes out of that trailer up in the wilderness, and he hardly knows this wilderness. This is at the other end of the Bighorn Mountains and where he's from, the Mustang. He comes out. What does he do? He is not listening to me right now. He's listening to the horse that I'm on, because that's now been his partner for like 30 to 45 days.
Yeah.
And that steadies him. And so now we all become part of this herd with a really incredible amount of trust. Yeah.
Herd dynamics are interesting. I've thought about herd dynamics a lot. I remember I was reading in a book the other day, one of the countless horse books on my shelf. I don't even remember which one, but it was relating the herd dynamic to you, because and I think about this all the time. Sometimes I'll help out because there's other horse properties I've stayed at. I really kind of embraced the full-time horse bumdom thing for a few years there, and I've helped out in places where athletics and sports like dressage or eventing or something is the main focus, and it's very easy in those contexts to lose the this sort of sense of phenomena that in my opinion, you should have at what's happening between people and horses. Like this is a silly example, but this is the way I think when you talk about the wilderness. Like if you saw a gorilla, partnering up with a cow elk, it would be a big deal. That would be a strange sight to see.
Yeah.
The whole world would talk about it, you know?
Right. Yeah.
But that's what's happening. And it's about as unnatural as that. Like that's how profound the connection is. Like you are trying to interact with all of nature in such a way that it's easy to lose that, because we've made this partnership for so many thousands of years. You just think like, oh yeah, he's riding a horse. Yeah, he's riding an animal. It's a wild thing, right? But this book I was reading was talking about herd dynamics, and it was asking the question of where you are in the herd at any given time. Like it's not just them, it's you. If you're involved, if you're wanting to do this for real. And I thought that was so fascinating, because it was a great example of ways that I had never found myself thinking. But
Yeah.
that's what was happening. It's what's happening anytime you walk out into a string of horses to catch one. Like that it would be a valuable question for you to ask in that moment. Like, what is my role here? Am I a
Yeah.
part of this, or am I an outside force? And if so, how do I change that to the other? It's very interesting. Sorry, that was just a side note, but
Yeah. No, that is very interesting. And especially if you do go out with all those horses and they actually come to you and want to be around you versus running from you. It's interesting to consider
Yeah, why would
those
they do such a
dynamics in
thing?
that relationship,
Yeah,
right?
your style of leadership.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
really something.
we were working on that concept in the early stages with the local police department. We had a conversation with them right before the holidays, and it's all about how the officers, and we had a tragedy. We had an officer get killed in the line of duty almost a year ago, and it's really affected the morale and the effectiveness of the force here. You know, understandably so. It was really bad, and
Yeah.
the whole town reeled from it. You know, actually, all of Wyoming did. They
I
all
bet.
came in. And what we talked about with them a couple of weeks ago was training attributes of, softening aggression when you need to
Mm-hmm.
with an officer and how they impact, the room or the street or whatever, or the
Yeah.
conversation. Um, how you are able to have direction
Mm-hmm.
with a situation versus dominance,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we talked about that and how you do that with the herd. And it was pretty. There was a lot of question marks, and there were some surprises that you could actually illustrate that with horses. But if you think about it, if you walk in and you're spinning a rope every single day, and that's how you catch horses, that's exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get a
Yeah,
horse that
absolutely.
is afraid of you for a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe it's going to come around. But if you walk in with a different kind of leadership, trust, and expectation, you're going to have a much better relationship.
Yeah.
Taking nothing away from big working cow ranches where yes you do need to do that. The horses are in different roles,
Right.
but what we're talking about is the relationships as survivors, trauma survivors, the relationships that we have with people in our lives at every level,
Yeah.
and what are we responsible for.
Right. And it's interesting because with horses, we talk a lot about the mirror neurons and how they're reflecting back on us, our behavior, our state of mind. And we do that same thing with people, but it's so convoluted because we also have, vocal communication that we put in there. Where I
Yep.
think one thing the horses do is they really strip it down. Like, they can't be like, I don't want to be around you right now. But they can definitely show us, and we really have to reflect on why are they acting the way they're acting, for better or worse right now. What are the elements that you're bringing into that relationship? And that makes a huge difference in the human world. I think it's a lot more difficult in the human world.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah, I think about that all the time. When I've been trying to quantify, as I said earlier, forgive my redundancy, but I've worked really hard in the past year to figure out what is going on between me and these animals and everyone else around me. Like what is happening in that round pen. I've watched some amazing
Yeah.
sessions with people, and it's not always so easy to quantify, but in order
It's
to
not.
try and get an understanding of it, I've brought myself back to those first mornings we talked about earlier with that little black horse. And it felt to me, if I were to try to sum it up in bullet points, it's a strange experience to stand in a fenced area. The fence gives you an interesting feeling. The fact that you're fenced in with something with 1,000 pounds of wild animal. And there's real like emotional consequences to that. It does something to you. It's not like doing talk therapy. It's a whole
Mm-hmm.
different universe here.
Right.
And there's a healthy level of discomfort and fear when you stand in there, and you're both feeling it. Everybody's a little bit afraid and uncomfortable. And I remember standing there, and it was like this animal is asking you, which they quite literally are, what are you, who are you, what do you want, why should I trust you? And you have to answer them without language, and you
Yeah.
cannot lie.
Yeah.
Try and replicate that experience in a therapy
Right.
setting. I mean, that's and the and you could elaborate on that forever, which is essentially what we do in most of our conversation, because in the, in the long periods of time that I spent, especially in the early days, unable to touch these horses, catch them, halter them, my answer to that question, why should I trust you? I didn't have one.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that say about me
Yeah.
in those moments? Well, I don't know why you should trust me. I don't trust myself.
Yeah.
Can't stand myself.
Yeah.
It's
And I
very
think that
interesting.
even goes back to what you were saying about how the Mustangs kind of helped you to learn to like yourself. I feel like that's something I also experienced, where they do really encourage us in a way to ask some of those deeper questions. And they really do bring the emotions and the things we're feeling to the surface in a really heightened way, as you kind of described, that time when you're in the round pen with a wild horse and suddenly you're very attuned to your emotions and how they're reflecting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It happened. Like it's not, like you said, it's not linear. If you put three socks and I in a round pen right now, we would start from zero again.
Which you should.
Absolutely. Like it's not the kind of thing where, oh, we've done this before, my internal state means nothing here. It will
Yeah.
always mean something every time you see them. It's very strange. I can't think of a single setting in day-to-day life where you could replicate that well. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited about the program, is because
Yeah.
I don't know how else to do that for somebody.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the journey of humanity. You said something before that you were a mess of a human at a time in your life. And I think a lot of times, at least for me, I have always had this vision in my head that I would come to this point where I had it all figured out and things would be smooth sailing and
Hmm.
life would be easy. And it also goes back to what you were saying, Matson, about how many people have experienced trauma and loss. And I think it can all be summed up in that life is this huge, hard, difficult journey. And I don't know if there's anyone who really goes through life that doesn't experience some of those really hard things. I think a lot of times we hide it. We don't want to talk about it. We maybe even hide it from ourselves. Um, and so the Mustangs can almost go with us into that experience where, like you said, Gabriel, like it just keeps developing, it keeps continuing. You go in and whatever thing it is you need in that moment or whatever point you're at, the Mustangs seem to find a way to help you find that.
Yeah, well, and this will be my last. I won't diatribe on this for the rest of the day, I swear. But what I think is so, what I think might be the reason for that is that, wild animals of any kind, especially ones with that level of emotional intelligence, they don't have the same concept of time as you do. It's not the
Yeah.
same. That same mutual friend we mentioned earlier, he's a horseman as well. And he always says that whatever happens with your horse that day, it wasn't personal. And that could easily be misinterpreted. But what he means, and what I think is absolutely true, is that when I walked into that round pen for the first few times, all those reasons that I might not carry myself in such a way that I was worth trusting, they don't have anything to do with that moment. I'm walking in there and I'm thinking to myself, if you were to ask me those questions from a human perspective, like, well, can I trust you? Who are you? Who are you?
Mm-hmm.
I would answer you with answers entirely relative to my past. Well, here's what I am. I'm the guy who did this. Like when I met you, I said, well, I'm a divorced, homeless, bankrupt, former addict living next to the barn. That's what I would have said. But the horse asked me, no, who are you now
Yeah, they don't
in this
care.
moment? Who are you
Yeah.
today, right now? And I have to answer that question in such a way that those stories don't define me, at least not in that round pen.
Mm,
And I think that that's a real gift to give to somebody. I'm going to try
yeah.
and create an opportunity for you to answer that question. Who are you now? Who do you want to be now?
Yeah.
I can't get over the profundity of that every time I do
and
it.
and even maybe that those stories that we let define us, because like you said, the horse doesn't know, they don't
Doesn't
really
care.
care. All they care is how we're now acting and behaving and having emotions. um but I think we can even change how that story defined us, um to being one of here's all the bad, horrible things that happen versus here's everything that I've overcome and
Yeah.
experienced and learned from it. And I think even
Hmm.
that approach to our story creates a very different dialogue in our mind and in our energy.
Yeah, I would agree. The way that we work with clients and the Mustangs now is we typically work either one on one or two on one. So two clients, one horse,
Mm-hmm.
and for each client, we'll come up with kind of like some characteristics of things that they want to work on,
Mm-hmm.
and they're pretty basic. What's coming up for me on this one is, everybody has issues with trust in their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say a very small percentage of the people come to us with a really decent working knowledge of how to move with horses.
Mm-hmm.
And to introduce to somebody, how are you going to get that horse, that wild horse, to trust me? And that's where we're really different from your average equine therapy program, where we're not using therapy horses.
Yeah.
We're using experience horses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the experience is going to lead to your therapy, is going to lead to your recovery, is going to lead to your healing. But this horse is not a therapy horse.
Yeah.
But it's going to take you to a dimension that's really amazing. Taking nothing away from therapy horses, their designation is a completely different type of
Yeah.
client, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about trust with a Mustang, and this is the same for a human too, is you want to focus on what's important to that Mustang in the relationship. And there's several traits that are important to a wild horse, but the first three we all know. It's care, connection, and safety. That's all they really want, because care means food, it means warmth. They want a decent connection with you
Mm-hmm.
because they don't want to be traumatized or wrangled or pushed or prodded or all of those things. And then they want to be safe. They just want to know that they're safe. So
Yeah.
you're not going to get that in day one.
Mm-mm.
You're going to get a sense of awareness of where that horse is at on trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, even like all of our quarter horses that we have too, they all have these different personalities. But what we like to say, and I know I've heard this before, I don't think I made this up, horses communicate in gestures. So, like a series of gestures. And a lot of times that's the whisper, in the sense that that first gesture is so subtle, you might miss it. But he did
Yeah.
give
A
he
lot.
did give you a
Mm-hmm.
chance to say,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
I'm not digging this,
Yep.
right?
Right.
And even if they say, oh, I am digging this, I want that carrot,
You
which
got
we
to
don't,
catch that moment
you
too.
got to catch that too,
Yeah.
right? And then so that first, and then everybody knows this, it's just all built around the dance, which is what he described initially, which is pressure and release. Don't go through the kill, don't go for the kill and the halter
Yeah.
right away, because then you got to start over. So, um,
Yeah,
It's
that's
true.
so true.
and that's the first thing that we typically do, is we put our clients in the arena, a standard arena, and just say, go catch that horse. And some of them could spend the whole session trying to catch that horse, a Mustang.
Of all the things we do, that's my favorite thing.
And some of them don't even know how to use an even a normal halter.
Mm.
But we'll
Yeah.
just we'll just see how close they can get. Now this
Yeah.
is this is a trained, beyond Greenbrook Mustang. Now you would do something very different with it untouched.
Yeah, of course.
But you can do it. You can do it in a 20 by 20 or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but you have to watch for those gestures, and then
Yeah.
that's where you start being aware of, what did you just do that caused that gesture,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
what does that gesture mean? Um, and most people are profoundly impacted by that,
Yeah.
because
I
you,
would imagine it has a huge level of information that it's feeding back, probably both to the person doing it and anyone watching it, just to see that interaction and that approach when someone kind of goes in there not knowing much
yeah,
Oh
and to see
yeah.
how that unfolds.
and all of it carries through the next sequence of events. The way that they move has to change from what's normal for them.
Mm-hmm.
because you've got an animal that, yes, it's now getting pretty domesticated, but
Mm-hmm.
it is going to doubt you for a while, years maybe,
Yeah.
and you're going to have to earn that trust. Um,
Yeah. And I've seen with my Mustangs at least, they're obviously different, but some of them will react completely different to different people depending on that approach.
yeah,
So even having lived in the domestic world, they don't necessarily lose that attunement to people and people's agenda.
No, Three Socks hasn't lost his. He was pretty Mustangy this morning.
mhm,
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's just I mean, like there's certain things that seem to be this is just pure speculation, but there are certain things about a horse that has been wild for a portion of its life that seem to never go away. And
Yeah.
I love that about them. I mean,
Well,
yeah.
yeah. If that can be preserved while they're still living in our world, I think that's one of the most beautiful things with the Mustang to maintain that while they also are living with us in the domestic world is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
yeah, we're a little bit limited in um, the herd that we have for our organization for a number of reasons. So we've had to use our Mustangs. We have access to three. We've got kind of one in rotation right now that's doing all the work,
Mm-hmm.
and he's only getting used 2 to 3 times a week. So he's spread out. But even being used 2 to 3 times a week, you would think that he would see the routine in it,
Yeah.
and he wouldn't give that last couple clients the runaround every time. Every time,
Yeah.
even if they come back after having been successful the session before, he still will make you earn it.
Yeah. And
And
maybe that's one of the things about the Mustangs is it's not a one and done.
Yeah.
I think it's a little easier with domestic horses from my experience that um, you can kind of do something and it kind of settles in, and that's just how it is going forward. With the Mustangs, it seems like it's constant conversation. If they haven't experienced humans in a way that they've just broken them apart, then the Mustangs, they keep having those conversations with you. They keep asking you to be honest in your interactions with them.
Yeah. Yeah, for a while I wondered about whether or not the more stangy parts of everything I've learned about horses would translate to other places. And I had one victory lap. I don't know if I ever told you this, but the first time it had been about a year or two of just full time horse, just drinking from the fire hose of horses. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when I met Three Socks, and it occurred to me in the round pen that like, oh, when he asks, "Can I trust you?" He's not asking, "Are you going to be mean to me?" He's asking, "Are you going to eat me?" That's a very different level of wariness, right? And that's
Yeah.
essentially a very simple way to describe what we're talking about, like that kind of attunement to nature. And for a while, I wondered, I was like, is this just Mustangs? Like, does this way that you could handle a horse translate well? And right after that, or maybe a few months after that, I took another strange opportunity to go to New Mexico to another strange place with strangers again, as was my habit at the time, to a thoroughbred ranch. And I'm not even sure why to this day. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. And it was only former champion off track thoroughbreds who hadn't been ridden in years. And they wanted,
Mm-hmm.
this wonderful woman who's become a good friend of mine wanted to start to handle these monsters. I mean, it was just such a different experience. I was a little bit shocked and terrified. I mean, the smallest horse there is like 17 hands and weighs like
Mm-hmm.
1,800 pounds, and they haven't been handled in years, some of them. And there was one horse, I'll never forget him because he looks just like the Black Stallion. His name's Fish. He's the most beautiful, looks like a painting. And she said, "Yeah, well, I'd really like to catch Fish, but he's nigh uncatchable. So, good luck with that one." And out of sheer ignorance, green ignorance, and
You're like,
habit,
that's the one for me.
well, I just walked in there and it wasn't even a round pen. It was a square, probably 20 by 20, 30 by 30 paddock. And it's New Mexico, so it's all just dust and sand. And, or
Mm-hmm.
no, it was northern Arizona, sorry. And I walked into that pen, and within 3 minutes of doing what was just habit from being around Three Socks, that horse was attached to my hip. I was shocked. I've never seen an animal before or since probably that had that much desperation for somebody to tell him that things were all right in a language he could understand. It probably looked ridiculous. All I did was walk around. I take no credit for this. Anybody could do this, but it was just I just moved around that paddock with him for not even 3 minutes
That's
probably.
not true.
I'm telling you, man, it was.
I'm saying most people couldn't do that.
Oh well, if
Yeah.
if
You're
I could do it,
underestimating
anybody
yourself
could.
again.
I'll put it that way. But it was amazing to me how well it translated and how that instinct was not, reserved for former wild animals. And
Yeah.
this sounds like a bit of an intellectual leap, but you do also see it in people. And I guess to land the plane back to the subject of this conversation, you especially see it in people who are living their worst nightmare right now.
Yeah.
Like you absolutely see it. It's like somebody tell me or something. I'm just asking the universe to tell me that some part of existence is safe and do it in a language I understand. Because frankly, words might not work for me. You know, it's a profound thing.
Yeah, that is very profound. I remember being in that place where it's like, someone just help me. And yeah, for me, it was my Mustang that kind of stepped in and, all right, here's what you need. Here's what you need right now.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
That brought up something for me when I was in a different capacity with horses, guiding or packing, for elk and other large animals. We would often pack people in to drop camps, several hours in, and then come get them, a week later. And the horse is really just a mode of transportation, right, for them. But it's the only way to get to where they're going. But we would always still give them, like 15 minutes in the parking lot before, as we're bagging up all their stuff in the panniers and such. And I would always just call it horse logic. This is horse logic for you who's never been around a horse. Just the basics of what you need to know so you don't do anything catastrophically stupid that messes up our whole string, right?
Yeah.
Seems logical.
And it was just the basic stuff, like just really basic. But you got a sense in that capacity, working with mules too, of how far these animals would go to accommodate our stupidity.
Oh yeah.
Right. And they get ridden by so many different people in that season, and they see all these different things. What I found is, when this was, obviously you're not teaching anything, you're just trying to get your group up the mountain safely. So just horse logic is a good way to go. And it literally just would astound me, how little the average person cares about partnering with an animal that does have their life in their hands.
Literally.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how much we put on their backs.
It is interesting, and sadly, I think it's part of what has put the Mustangs in such a hard situation as a species as a whole, because a lot of people do just see them as a tool. They want them to use them for their purposes. They're not really interested in learning from them. And as a result, they've landed in a bad place with people who aren't ready to step up and learn and improve themselves. And like Gabriel, you were talking about when you went in with that thoroughbred and you're like, oh, this is just happening so easy. And I think a lot of that is just the different way you learn to be with horses compared to how they're so often treated, which is just, you're just something for me to use. And you should do what I want you to do, when I want you to do it, how I want you to do it.
Yeah.
And that approach changes when we're open to like, well, let's see what we learn from this interaction. And we kind of go on that journey with them where they're guiding us along the way. Is pretty incredible, but also I think something that's still quite rare in the world.
Without question.
A few things that I definitely wanted to hit a little bit more You talked, and some of the information you gave me, Matson, about connection, quite a bit about connection. What is the role that you see that playing in life with horses? I think it's something I've also thought about a lot. The purpose of it and how we really come to find that true connection. I think the lack of it creates a lot of turmoil for people. And so, what are some of the insights you've
Yeah.
had with that?
You know, I wrote that specifically from a trauma perspective, from a
Mm-hmm.
recovery perspective. And we have been working so hard on making sure that we understand all the different pathways through trauma with the types of clients that we serve.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have mental health experts on board just yet. And I don't know that we will because we're an alternative environment
Wow.
for discovering and you know your wounds and connection is there, has to be there. You said earlier, you know, a lot of people hide from their experiences, from their, you know, or they suppress. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I had done in my life for 30
Mm-hmm.
plus years before divorce and before fire. And when the trauma really hit me to the point that I was, you know, destabilized,
Yeah.
really destabilized, dysfunctional,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
ridiculous levels of anxiety and such. I think I had hid from them. So I would argue that wasn't experiencing it. And it wasn't until like I could really, really look it in the eye and be honest with myself and my support system around me with, you know, do I want to be connected to it or not?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so then you take, for example, combat veterans and what they deal with. Most of us think that their PTSD comes from an atrocity that they saw, right?
Mm-hmm.
10% of PTSD in the military were deployed, you know, or were active combat. 10%. So where does
Wow.
all that other PTSD come from? Significant.
Mm.
And yes, that is a number. It might
Yeah.
not be 100% accurate, but it's about 10%.
But
But
and I
that,
think your assumption's totally correct that we assume
right.
Wow.
it
So
is a very traumatic event.
a lot of times it is a matter of, you know, what are the connections that that person has with destabilizing events throughout their life. Okay, so that's one way of looking at connection. Um, if you were to ask, and we do ask this question, we ask this question before we say thank you for your service.
Mm-hmm.
We ask the question, why did you serve? What do you
Mm.
miss most? Of course, we appreciate your service,
Mm-hmm.
but let me understand why you served. And there's a
Yeah.
multitude of answers that we all could guess on.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are great, and would make you proud, and some of them would make you scared.
Yeah.
But what they really, really miss, and causes them the disconnection is they miss being valued. They miss being utilized. Those are the two
Yeah.
big things.
Yeah.
And they miss protecting and being protected. And the transition back into society where they haven't been trained to go back and do, you know, new skill sets that can help them be functional, that can help them recover from what they're missing. I mean, you know, they went over there to do that because that's what they wanted their career to be.
Yeah.
And that's a big, big, big disconnect. So in this first year, I think I would have to say 70% of our clients were military, and out of that 70%, probably 50% saw combat, were deployed.
Mm-hmm.
So we really had to get to an understanding of that,
Yeah.
of what it is they're suffering from. Was it an atrocity or is it a transition? And most of
Mm.
it has to do with the transition.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we can all relate to as people that have dealt or are dealing with trauma is how do you transition from one stage to another?
Mm.
And along that way, how are your relationships? As I wrote in the notes that I sent you, I severed just about all of my relationships because I didn't either trust or think that anybody could understand me. And I also think I was bitter enough that I just didn't want any more relationships. And I was a defective father as well. I could not parent in the shape that I was in. So the connections there for me are connections to my frailties and my dispositions and my connections to my loved ones and my relationships. And then after all these years later, I would say first and foremost, and our friend who also has a podcast speaks to this a lot, is my connection to service to others, and having a passion and a purpose around that. You have to have a connection in your life. Okay, so I don't want to compare, but in normal therapy, in the four walls, if you don't have that connection, how do you find it? And none of us are going to say, well, not all of us are going to say the connection can look like what Gabriel came away with his amazing connection to horses.
Yeah.
But the ability to go there, to go that mile, and to go through the suffering, we've all experienced that when we've had a difficult horse to work on the ground with, break, start, or ride out. That first time you ride, I've heard you mention that with your winter rides and things like that, that trust that you get through. Okay, well, it's there again the next time you get on that horse.
Yeah.
And you have to work through it. So that is teaching connection.
Yeah. I mean, I just had about a million thoughts go through my head on that whole conversation. I wish I could vocalize them all. But one that stuck out as you were talking about the veterans and coming back, it really seemed like it had a correlation to what you experienced with losing your home in the mountains after that wildfire, where they have this thing that they've built, this place where they belong and where good things are happening. And I think you're right, especially for veterans, that they kind of come home and it's all stripped from them. They don't really have that same level of value that they're told they have in there. And in that same way, I think that happens in different transitions in our life where we've built up our identity. I think we've talked a little bit about identity and labels and how that can impact us. And we've built up this identity that we're kind of leaning on and dependent on. And like, that was something that happened for me, a lot. That kind of all came crashing down. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know like who I am, where I am anymore. And that also kind of goes back to how you talked some about how trauma can speak to trauma. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe how you've seen that play out either for yourself or with the horses, and you too, Gabriel, if there's something?
Yeah. I've had it happen and go on for me for a long time. And, I mentioned earlier, or maybe in some writings to you, that I've served in numerous capacities working in recovery and rehab and mentoring young men and things like that. And I remember the first time it happened, I just had a guy turn to me and say, how is it how is it what to say? How is it those words? And this is when I was a bit younger. And I just said, I do believe that God provides me with these words. There's no other way I could understand it. And then I started to work with it a little bit when I started to understand what empathy was and being an empath and all that kind of stuff, and these terms that I hadn't heard before. Because I could just do it to a certain point with, I might be terrible at it with my loved one in the kitchen, trying to like know what to do or be responsible or thoughtful.
Yeah.
But there's a different connection on trauma to trauma and pain to pain. And I've just heard somebody that was giving a lecture on moral injury say this, and I'll see if I can get this right. It was here in Sheridan, and it was a VA talk, and the guy introduced this professor from, I think, Chicago, and he said, "This is the guy's the most amazing listener I've ever seen in my life, ever heard in my life." I've never experienced this level. And the guy came out and he just said, I'm nothing that great. I have this ability because most of my life, growing up in my adult life, nobody listened or heard me, and I know what it's like to not be heard. And I know what it feels like when you are that person that listens in the breakthrough. And I think that that's somewhat similar with trauma to trauma is, you know how bad you need the understanding, and you know what that level of suffering feels like. I mean,
Yeah.
I could go well into the descriptions of what the fire and then 2 years later the flood did to me and what it looked like, and I can still feel it, smell it, hear it, see it, whatever. And then when you go through it with your kids, it is devastating and it feels very unfair.
Mm-hmm.
But it's no different than losing a loved one. It's, it is a very, very intense loss. It's life.
Yeah.
But when it's like that, you don't have a choice but to feel it. And you won't make it if you can't work through it. You just won't. You'll become destabilized and dysfunctional or numb by hiding it and not experiencing it. And it will eventually catch up to you.
Yeah.
And I truly think, with the horse is different because there's not a lot of talking that goes on.
Yeah.
Like, we aren't therapists. I'm
Yeah.
talking way more now than I would ever talk in a session. It's support, and it's being able to line up the right experience and then letting
Yeah.
them have it and then journal it and then recommend that they take that to the next level with a therapist or with their loved one or what have you. We're not here to talk them through anything.
Yeah. And I think that's important to distinguish. I think we have started a conversation in our culture that everything needs to be talked through. And, we need to be vulnerable and share the things that have happened to us. And I think that that can be helpful. But I think with horses and just also some of the things you've said about, you don't have quote unquote mental health professionals working with you. I think that we need to really recognize that maybe um, a lot of the things that we're depending on to help us are not actually the things that are going to help us. Um, I know I've shared some of my stories. And for me, my husband and I, we both tried counseling. We tried marriage counseling. Most of it just made things worse for us. And I'm not saying this is true for everybody or no one should do it, but I am saying that I think, and this is one thing I really want to bring to light with the Mustangs, is that there might be another path for people that brings about healing, those insights, the changes you need to make in your life. And it might not be going to a therapist. In a way, I feel like we've kind of replaced our friends and family with therapists, someone we pay to go talk to and just, spit out everything. For me, when I did stuff like that, it made it worse. I felt worse about my life. I felt worse about myself. It wasn't helping me to feel better. But then on the other hand, I could go out with my horses, and that is where I would get like the answers I needed for that moment in time. The things I needed to change in my life or the things I had within my control would really be brought to the forefront of my mind. So I guess for my part, I kind of want to change that conversation, that maybe there is a different path to our mental, spiritual, emotional wellness in this world. I have also worked within the mental health world, and it's a dark, hard place. And it's such a contrast to someone coming and being with a horse. And so I guess, I don't know, we can decide if we want to leave this in or not. But honestly, I think the programs that are a lot more natural and really follow the horse in a way, in a lot of ways, are a lot more beneficial than trying to chase what culture and quote unquote research, which may or may not be valid and reliable, are kind of telling us are the path to healing and
Yeah.
wholeness and growth.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump in and then please pick up with where you were, because that was some amazing stuff you were saying. What just came up for me was, and it's awesome having Gabriel here because I get to be reminded completely of like what it was like to just be free and just be able to like give this sense of, awe and wilderness to a person and not have to worry
Yeah.
about, my insurance premiums going up and that kind of stuff.
Dudes, yeah.
Wish they would.
And when we first started this organization, we ran a pilot through a local equine therapy organization that does a great job here in Sheridan. And I remember when I was talking, might have even been with some clients, and I had a question that I asked, and the executive director right away just said, "No, you can't ask that question. We don't have a mental health therapist around, mental health professional." And I don't remember what the question was, but I remember the guy looked at me, this big, grizzly, strong veteran, combat veteran. He looked at me and then he looked at her and goes, "What's wrong with that question? Kidding me? What's wrong with that question? I got no problem with that question." And then he just answered it. And therein lies some of the problem with the resource that we're trying to provide. Is some of these folks, and I would probably include myself, don't want to be stigmatized. Don't want to have to get a note from their general practitioner or something like that. They don't want it to be mental health. So you have to be really careful about how you craft what we're doing. Because ultimately you want people to feel really comfortable coming into the place. And so we have an interesting way that we provide the service. We have host facilities because we're brand new. And we don't have millions of dollars yet to buy or rent our own
Trust me,
place.
the things I would do if I had millions of dollars to
But
create something.
we'll get there. It seems like the
Yeah.
curve for most people that do well in this industry is a couple of years before you can be leasing your own place.
You
So
will get there.
but we have wonderful, wonderful country around us and many people that have leased us their facilities and hosted us. And what's important is that the client experiences, I'm driving away from everything. I'm kind of going up the mountains and I'm leaving everything behind. And now I'm going into a very safe environment where there aren't a lot of people that are working or a lot of other classes going on or something like that. It's a very private, secluded experience.
Yeah.
And that's worked really well for us in this first year.
Yeah. And I think we make a mistake sometimes when we classify mental health and we focus on diagnoses and things like that, because it really is just part of who we are as humans. We've obviously, as humans, wanted to kind of take that down, break it apart, and quantify it. And I think, kind of like Gabriel was saying, not everything with the horses and what they do for us can be quantified. It's not always easy to explain. That was a big reason why I wanted to even start this podcast, because I knew that the horses did something for me, but it was really hard for me to vocalize that and to like put that into words. I think those of us who have experienced, it's like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, you don't even have to tell me. I can feel those same experiences that you've also felt because I've had those, but it's a little bit harder to put into words and to quantify it and say, well, it works because of X, Y, and Z, even though I think those of us who have worked with horses and Mustangs know that, I'm not always sure how it works, but I definitely know that it gives me something better in my life.
Yeah, and that's not the same thing as talk therapy. I mean, that's not even the same category of what's happening. I mean, we've talked about this before. I've got some experience now under my belt with a mental health professional, a good one, and it's been, I've gained some real value from it. But I tell you what, I wish I was more well versed in these kind of things, but I don't know, maybe maybe my barnyard talk is valuable to somebody, but I guess it's almost like the way I sometimes think about it is you move through life and you sort of are gathering up the weight of your experience, right? Whatever that might be, as
Yeah.
numerous as those experiences may be and as negative as you might perceive
Yeah.
them. And you sort of wear them on you like this backpack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're told nowadays, especially now, that the way to deal with all that weight you're carrying is to open up that backpack up and tear it all to pieces and make a huge mess and like really get a
Look
sense of
really
what's
closely at it.
yeah, get a real sense of what's in there. And there might be moments where that's required because maybe there's
Yeah.
something in there that you're
Absolutely.
unaware of, right? And that I
Mm-hmm.
see the value in that, and I've experienced some value there. But when I think about my experience with the Mustang and with horses and where I was then and where I'm at now, just from a few
Mm-hmm.
years of being around these animals all the time,
Yeah.
um, I can look back and say that, you know, I can take, it's a very different emotional response that's in me when I think of the fact that, I know what's in the bag. Like I'm well aware of what's in
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, I did this thing and experienced these profound connections and had to be very, dare I say it about myself. There's certain parts, even in the most subtle thing with working with 1,000-pound animal, you're going to have to be brave and you're going to have to do it with your backpack full of experiences on.
Yeah.
And none of that stuff is going to go away. And you're going to have to learn, if you want to create that connection, you're going to have to learn how to walk very differently and to be very differently without making those experiences go away. And it almost doesn't
Yeah.
matter what's in there. And the horse doesn't care what's in there. I guess that's what I'm
Yeah.
getting to. And that's, to me, that's what I needed. I didn't need to
Yeah.
look through it. I needed to learn how to carry it differently.
Mm.
And I needed
Yeah.
to be around someone or something that was only interested in how I was going to carry myself now with all
Yeah.
those experiences. And that is something that I can say very clearly that I don't think you're going to get in talk therapy. I don't think it's the same thing at
Yeah.
all. So,
Yeah, I love that analogy a lot, actually, because I think you're right. We can't just unload our backpack. It's not like we can go through it and we're like, get rid of this, get rid of that. I mean, those experiences are what have made up our life. But for us to be able to develop the skills and the insights into, well, it's there, you're carrying it, whether you want to or not. So, how
yeah,
are you going to carry it? Yeah,
yeah.
I love
And
that.
thank you. Yeah, just came up with it right now. So I hope I hope
It
it's
was a good
valuable.
one. Well done.
Yeah, yeah, and another thing that's just a fact. We started working with clients in January, and so it's almost a year. We have not charged a dime.
Hmm.
Wow.
We are a 501c3.
Yeah.
We don't have a designation letter that makes contributions tax exempt yet, but we have the paperwork in process. But we have a sponsor nonprofit that's also a veteran-based organization that when we do get donations,
Yeah.
they'll run it through them so they can do the tax exemptions.
Yeah.
But we haven't had a lot of money coming in,
Yeah.
and we're proud to say we're doing this on our own steam. And it goes back to like the type of people that have been attracted to us, which is about 8 to 10 volunteers slash board, etc. They do it because they either have the same passion or they admire the passion,
Yeah.
and the work that we're doing within within this community. And we could have gone about it differently. We could have raised all the money first and spun the story. But I think all of us were kind of anxious to prove that we could do it and that there actually was a need and that we could
Yeah.
effectively get insurance,
Yeah.
get the designations, etc., and find people that would lend us their $1 million property
Yeah.
to let us bring in clients that needed help, and we've proven that. And I think it's also going to bring us a unique type of person, because we've been told this already, and we welcome anybody who's listening to this and hears it and feels it to come out. to call us.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to recognize that place that we're coming from.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Would we like to have our expenses covered? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And to pay some salaries and some buy some more horses, and yeah, we'd love that, and we'll get
Yeah.
there. But
Yeah.
we're building this on our own abilities right now.
Yeah.
And I'll tell one quick story, because you asked earlier, like what that feels like when it's trauma to trauma or pain to pain. We did a big podcast in June, and not long after, I got a call on my phone, and it was from Massachusetts, and I was like, "Who's calling me from Massachusetts?"
Yeah.
And I remember exactly where I was, and I answered the phone, and it was this guy, and he said, "Hey, this is so and so. I heard your podcast."
Yeah.
With the Dry Creek Wrangler. And I said, "Oh yeah." He said, and I said, "Oh, well, thanks for the call." He said, "What are you doing right now?" And I said, "I'm sitting driving to the grocery store in my truck."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Oh man, that sounds amazing." And I'm like, "Sorry, what?" He goes,
Yeah.
"Driving a truck in Wyoming, that must just be amazing." And I was like, yeah, I try not to take it for granted,
It's
but
kind of amazing.
yeah, I'm just on my way
Yeah,
to
it is.
pick up some groceries and driving the truck, and dogs are in the back, and this ends up being a client that is now a good friend. In fact, he called out of the blue early this morning, and his background is law enforcement, retired PD, and outside of Boston, really tough area. Then went into administration within schools, carried that trauma, etc. And anyway, the point is, he carried a huge amount of anxiety going into whether he wanted to come out for a week, 5 straight days, and work with us from Boston. No horse experience whatsoever, but open about his experience and his needs and his desire to experience the West. And what I'm leading to is, we were basically doing afternoon experiences for local clients. We didn't have anybody call us yet to have us build a 5-day straight program for them. So it posed a challenge for us, and we thought about it long and hard as to whether we could do it and whether we had the facility to do it. And we got to the point where we could, and then so our anxiety went away.
Yeah.
The anxiety around, can we serve you?
Yeah.
Can we help you? Because we're not taking your money.
Yeah.
And he, is this back and forth of meeting each other, and me wanting to make sure, is this a guy we can help? Our horses can help?
Yeah.
And him being like, I don't know what is out there.
It's a jump. That is a jump. Yeah.
And my friends and family are going, "You're jumping on the plane
Yeah. What are
to
you
go
doing?
to where?"
Yeah.
And one day I remember I was driving up to the ranch, and he calls me, and it's kind of a 911. He's like, "Man, I don't think I can do it." And we're close. We're like 2 weeks out. And it's okay. It's not like, we've got a big down safety deposit for him. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
But we want to help him. We want to serve.
Right.
And we want to challenge ourselves,
There's
too.
a reason he reached out. Yeah.
And I just got out of the car, and I said, "Give me a second." Like, I stopped where I was driving. And I said, "Give me a second." And I videoed for 30 seconds where I was, and sent it to him, and then continued to drive to the ranch. And I go, this is what I'm doing right now. This is what you'll be doing every day. You will be driving up to this ranch from town. This is what it looks, sounds, and feels like. And then I got there, and I videoed the horses, because we didn't have a website at that point. We had okay social media, but we didn't have anything that tangibly made him feel safe.
Yeah.
And then I videoed the property, and he said, "This is it." And it clicked right there for him, that he knew he was with people that understood what was going on. And there's not many organizations that will do that, that will try to really go there. They might clinically try to do it and label you and give you this and tell you to do this, and that's the kind of work we want to do, where people can be upfront with us about where they're coming from, And he was
Yeah.
hard for a couple of days. He was really hard on himself. And man, he's become a close friend of Gabriel.
It's awesome.
He's all the way back in Boston. He sees a Mustang 3 times a week.
Spends more time with horses than I do.
But yeah, 3 times a week he
So
travels
That's awesome.
an
And
hour,
yeah, they're not as easy to find out there.
hour in each direction to go be with a
Wow.
horse.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is a relationship that I am grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's an incredible story. And I think it's definitely changing lives. It's such a double-edged sword because there's so much value. Yet at the same time, I think like you guys, I wish that Mustangs were accessible to everybody that had a desire to be around them. That the wilderness was more accessible to everybody. Just you talking about the Wyoming wilderness, like resonated with me. There's something different when you get away from the hustle and bustle of our culture and society and you're out there um, in the wilderness. And especially when you have a horse as your companion out there, it's something that's really incredible.
Life
Um,
changing. Yeah, and that's a goal of our organization is to get people multiple day trips up. We're literally 40 minutes from being in wilderness,
yeah.
Sheridan, and then we have sanctuary rides that we can do that are at the base of a national forest and wilderness. So it's really accessible here. It's Sheridan, Wyoming, where we're based, is just a really, really cool small town Western experience that, like you still can ride for hours and hours and hours in the mountains without seeing a fence
Yep.
Yeah, that's incredible.
or a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you need that. There's something really good about being with yourself without all those pressures around you.
Yeah,
It's
that's
really
that's
powerful.
what I was literally thinking in this moment when you sort of like addressed the audience a second ago. I thought like, boy, like how would I address the audience if somebody were listening to this, if if an accountant in Miami was listening to this and thought, if you're even wondering if this if it's even mildly interesting to you to have what is not like this is not cowboy camp, this is not a trail ride, this is not what's that movie City Slickers, like
Yeah.
it's this is a real. I love this interview because it's given me an opportunity to think about this in this way. Like it's a connection with nature and the wilderness and with yourself that if you're even wondering about it, it will work. I promise you. Like it would be an experience that you are not going to get anywhere else. And I'm so fortunate to get to even talk about it or have experienced it at all. But
Yeah.
it matters, like if we did this program in, like if we trailered up and went to Denver and did something, it would be great. And you could really have an impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
But it is different here. And you should come here. And because
Yeah.
it's not just, the, I can't get away from that word wilderness because as we're having this conversation, I'm like, yeah, it does feel as if this place and everything in it that is embodied in that horse is what affected my life so deeply. It's more of an
Where
encounter
you
with the
went,
wild. Absolutely.
Yeah.
places we went to. I mean, like I remember when I used to lead rides and you'd get all these tourists and they'd come and they would never stop talking.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be like, man,
Yeah.
I can't tell that story again. And this is, way back, everybody had to do the dude strings. And my line was always like, you know what the average amount of complete silence a person gets in a day?
Mm-hmm.
The average amount. And they're like, no, what? And I'm like, it doesn't include sleeping, but complete natural silence.
Yeah.
And I was like, and they're like, no, and this is true. At least it was back then. 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
I'm shocked that it's even 2 minutes. I would
Two
think it would
minutes.
be,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's average, right?
yeah.
Here it's a lot more. But a plane flying over, that just
Yeah.
disrupted it. Okay, but you got what, and then I would say, now let's enjoy the next 2 minutes.
Let's have some quiet. There's such truth to that, though. I think for me, like when we moved from a more of a town into like a very rural area where, the town has no stoplights, one gas station. Um, And it was like, once we're out here, and even when I go into our bigger town and come out, it's like you come out here and you can breathe again. Just the other night, I was out after dark because daylight savings time is so early now. So I was out after dark with the horses, just looking up at the sky. And a lot of times I'll kind of dread it. It's cold. I'm like, I just want to go to bed. I don't want to have to go take care of the animals. And I've been trying to change that mentality, because every time I get out there, it feels so good to, like, my soul to have that space. And so I was out there in the dark, and we're, backed up to national forest in the Rocky Mountains. So there's not much around, and you can see lights from town, but, just the peacefulness and like the relief that gives to your spirit to be able to have that downtime. And
Yeah.
I know from my life, most people don't get that, they don't get it every night like I get it now, which has definitely come at a cost. But to be able to provide that to someone else, where it's like you can come away from the world and you can like breathe and reset for a little bit, because our world is so in your face. It's so loud. It's so constant. It's really hard to find that breathing room. And I think that's part of what you guys are doing, is providing that opportunity to just come away from it.
Yeah. So, can I provide a little bit more clarification on what we do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So really, we teach natural horsemanship with the Mustang. And our overall goal is, when we're just talking about horsemanship, because I don't want people to think, oh, I want to go out there and go straight to the wilderness and ride,
Yeah.
tip to tail on a trail. Or, if you look at our websites or our social media, you'll see us riding in all different areas, but you'll also see, for the most part, people on the ground. So doing groundwork.
So
And
important.
we may emphasize a few things if people are coming in from out of state that don't have experience, like some good books to read or so, just to kind of understand why you would want to teach somebody how to control a horse's feet from the ground before they try to do it from the saddle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's really like our thing. If you can't do it from the ground, and we'll settle for in hand versus liberty, but most of them get to the point where they can do it in liberty, you can't get on that horse's back because you have not
So
accomplished
important.
trust. So you really do have to work for it, and it might be phase two. You're on the horse's back in the arena,
Yeah.
and then once you're riding in the arena, it's just like any other evolution. You're gonna go up into the mountains. The difference with our horses is they don't like the arena.
Yeah.
They don't like it at all.
Yeah.
Yep.
They behave, but they become much better partners off, out of the arena, up on the trails that they know, and where they like to, just trot and get some exercise. So the percentage of people that actually get up into the mountains right away, right now, pretty low, but it is an option. We also do retreats for people with experience, where we will do like the typical outfitter, where we can take you up into the mountains and provide an experience and things like that. But as far as like the therapeutic piece, a lot of that's going to happen on the ground. And we find that clients might be like, oh, I don't know about that, and then they get out here, or they get with the horse if they're local, and it is a consuming experience
Yeah.
developing that relationship on the ground with a
Yeah.
Mustang.
And I think one thing you said is a good point, is that it is work. Like, it's not, I would not say it's an easy experience,
Oh
but I do
no.
think it's one of
Yeah.
the deepest experiences you may ever have in your life, being with a horse, with a Mustang.
Absolutely.
Well, I feel like we could keep talking for probably hours, but we should
Easily.
probably wrap it up. I know there's so many other things that I'm like, we could talk about this and this and this. And as we wrap it up, can you guys just kind of give a rundown of where people can find you, how they can take advantage of you, how they can support you if that's something that they want to do, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, thank you for that, Shalice. So we do have a website, and I'm sure that we'll probably put that up in the notes. But
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
easehorsemanship.org is a great way to get a hold of us or to find about what we're doing. We're also on social media, Facebook and Instagram. Um, we'll kind of give you an idea of what we're doing day to day or the things that we love as an organization. You can reach our numbers are on the webpage, and email is on there. Please feel free to reach out at any point on that, and we'll try to get back and answer questions. And then yeah, just where we are. We're in Sheridan, Wyoming, which is north central Wyoming, not too far from the state line into Montana. So we're pretty close to Billings and Bozeman and Yellowstone, and a lot of amazing things to do. If you were to come in from out of town, there's a lot of really
Yeah.
cool things to do in the non-winter months. And it's just a really, really neat, rustic, traditional place to call home and to welcome visitors.
Yeah, really beautiful country. Anything else, Gabriel, you want to add? How can people find you?
Oh, they don't need to find me. They can just find At Ease. It's if you
Okay.
search Gabriel the Bull somewhere, I'll probably pop up. But even when you do that, At Ease stuff will probably be there anyway. So just go to ateasehorsemanship.org. That's the way to go.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just grateful to be here. Grateful to get to talk about this.
Yeah.
First time. I've never really got to sit down and talk about my horse experience because it's odd. In the land of cowboys, it's like I'm not a cowboy. I don't know anything. I'm just a guy who was thrust into this world and will never be the same. And my sitting here is just me making any type of attempt to if anyone else could have a similar experience, that would mean the world to me. So that's why I'm here. Those are
Yeah.
my only thoughts. So
Yeah.
And I am terrible at doing this, um, but we are a nonprofit. So,
Hmm.
other than just looking up and seeing how we can help you, if anybody's interested in donations or resources or getting involved as a service based organization, we definitely could use
yes,
your help.
we need trailers and hay.
And
Right?
everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I know always. Yeah, horses are not cheap.
Yeah.
They do require a good bit of care. So I think that's a great opportunity to throw out there for people who want to become involved in it to be able to help you guys do the work you're doing. And I just really want to thank both of you for sharing your stories. I know that a lot of times the stories that kind of come with people connecting with Mustangs are pretty deep and pretty potent and often very close to the emotional surface. I know they are for me. We definitely had some emotional moments because they really do something incredible. And so I'm very grateful that you guys were willing to come on here to talk not just about what you do at Ease and how you're going to help other people, but to share how the Mustangs and horses and reconnecting with nature has really helped both of you. I really appreciate it. I know that I'm going to be going away inspired and excited to keep sharing this message about how incredible they are, because when I talk to people like you, I can kind of think, okay, it's not just me. Like, I'm not just crazy living in my own little world. There is something so incredible about the Mustang horses. So thank you guys so much for being here and for taking your time to do this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalice. We appreciate you.
Thank you for joining us in learning about horses that heal and the humans who help them. We hope you'll continue with us on this journey. We'd love for you to subscribe on your favorite platform and follow The Touch of a Mustang on any of the major social media outlets. Please share with your friends, anyone who loves horses, or anyone who might be struggling and could benefit from this message. If you have felt the healing power of horses or help them in their divinely appointed mission, please reach out. We want to hear your story. As we say goodbye, always remember that the horse is always there to help you heal.